My name is Brooke Ellison. I am 34, and the night I understood my marriage was over did not happen in a courtroom or during a screaming fight at home. It happened in a hotel hallway, with music behind ballroom doors and my husband staring at me like I did not belong. Miles had told me days earlier that the Metropolitan Community Foundation Gala was too important for distractions because people there could change his career. I nodded because I had an invitation and a reason for being there. I drove myself and walked inside alone. The moment Miles saw me near registration, his face changed. He came straight toward me and asked what I was doing there, keeping his voice low enough to hide the anger underneath it. I told him I had been invited, and he assumed I had found some way to follow him. Kendra Lawson stood behind him in a black evening dress, looking between us as if she had just realized something important. Miles did not introduce me as his wife until Kendra asked if I was Brooke. At the registration desk, the woman searched my name twice, then said my guest badge had been canceled that afternoon by someone from Miles's office. I looked at him, and his expression told me it was not a mistake. He said I did not understand how much this room mattered to his future, and tonight was not the time to make things difficult. I asked whether he wanted me gone because he did not want these people knowing I was his wife. He avoided my eyes and told me to go home. When I stayed where I was, Miles turned toward the security officer near the ballroom entrance. He said there had been a misunderstanding and asked him to escort me out of the event area. The officer took one hesitant step toward me, but before he could speak, the ballroom doors opened behind him. Lydia Corbett, president of the foundation, walked into the hallway, saw me, and stopped. Then she looked at Miles and asked why the guest of honor was still standing outside. 11 years earlier, Miles was not the man standing outside that ballroom. We met while volunteering with a summer employment program for students, and he was funny, patient, and comfortable being ordinary. We rented a small apartment, bought furniture one piece at a time, and spent Sundays eating dinner with my parents. Back then, Miles used to tell people that my work mattered because I helped scared people believe losing one job did not mean losing their future. Bridge Forward began after I met a 47-year-old woman who had spent decades raising a family and suddenly needed to support herself. She did not know how to write a resume, explain the gap in her work history, or even describe what she was good at anymore. I invited a few women in similar situations to a free workshop, and 12 people showed up that first evening. Miles carried folding chairs into the room, ordered pizza for everyone, and told me on the drive home that I should keep going. Things changed after his first major promotion. He started spending more time with executives who talked about salaries, vacation homes, private clubs, and who knew the right people in the right rooms. At first, Miles only suggested that I apply for corporate jobs because I could make more money. But soon he began calling counseling something I had outgrown. Then he stopped coming to Bridge Forward events altogether, even when I asked weeks in advance, because he said community workshops would not help either of us move forward. I tried not to take it personally, so I changed little things instead. I bought nicer clothes for his dinners, attended networking events that exhausted me, and cut back on evenings at the program when he complained we never had enough time together. None of it fixed the distance, because the problem was no longer my schedule or my clothes. Miles had started believing that success meant having a spouse who made other people impressed, and one night he finally said what I had been slowly learning for years, if he wanted to go farther. He needed a wife who belonged in the room. By the time Miles started working with Kendra Lawson, I had already learned not to ask why certain invitations stopped, including me. Kendra handled communications for a community branding campaign connected to his company, and at first she was simply another name he mentioned over dinner. Then her name started appearing everywhere, in stories about meetings, dinners, introductions, and people Miles thought could help him move higher. She knew which boards mattered, which executives were worth meeting, and how to make herself comfortable in rooms Miles had spent years trying to enter. I noticed something else before I wanted to admit it. Miles had stopped asking me to attend events with him, but Kendra seemed to be at nearly every one of them. One night, I finally asked if something was happening between them, and he told me there had been no physical affair. Then he said something that hurt more than a confession probably would have. Kendra understands where I am trying to go. I asked where that left me, and he said I had chosen a small life while he was tired of apologizing for wanting more. What Miles did not understand was that Bridge Forward was no longer small. The 12 women from that first workshop had become hundreds of people each year, and we were helping them return to school, prepare for interviews, find childcare, and move back into stable work. I still kept my job at the community college because the program was growing carefully, and I never wanted its survival to depend on pretending we were bigger than we were. When the Metropolitan Community Foundation selected me for its Community Impact Medal, I tried several times to tell Miles, but every conversation turned back to his possible nomination for the Leadership Council. The foundation was also building a workforce partnership between Bridge Forward, the college, and several major employers. Miles had heard the name Bridge Forward in meetings for months, but he never connected it to me because he still called what I did my little workshops. If you have ever watched someone overlook what was right beside them, subscribe, because this was the moment everything started moving toward the truth. A few days later, an email arrived confirming that I would speak at the gala. It was the same night Miles had already told me I did not belong there. Lydia Corbett did not raise her voice or look angry. She simply apologized to me for the confusion at registration, then asked the security officer to clear the way so we could enter the ballroom. Miles stepped forward and asked what exactly was happening, but Lydia looked genuinely puzzled by the question. She told him I was not attending as anyone's guest. I was the person the foundation had invited everyone there to honor. The ballroom doors opened, and I saw my own photograph on the large screen above the stage. Around it were pictures from Bridge Forward workshops, women sitting through resume classes, parents practicing interviews, and graduates standing beside certificates they had worked months to earn. Miles stared at the images as if he were seeing pieces of our marriage translated into a language he suddenly understood. Those late evenings he had complained about, the weekends he called unnecessary, and the meetings he dismissed as little workshops had built everything he was looking at. I could see recognition arriving one detail at a time. When my name was announced, I walked onto the stage and kept my remarks simple. I talked about the 47-year-old woman who had once sat across from me, believing that losing her marriage and her financial security meant losing her future. I told the room that one chapter ending did not mean an entire life had ended with it. I did not mention Miles, our problems, or what had happened outside. That night belonged to the people who had trusted Bridge Forward enough to begin again. After the presentation, Lydia introduced me to several guests who already knew the program. Then Grant Becker, the chief operating officer at Miles's company, walked over and congratulated me personally. He said his team was looking forward to finalizing the workforce partnership with Bridge Forward. Miles was standing close enough to hear every word, and for the first time all evening, he looked completely unsure of what to say. Grant glanced at Miles, then back at me, and asked whether we already knew each other. Miles swallowed before answering that I was his wife. Nobody laughed, and nobody needed to. I looked at his face and understood something that hurt more than the canceled badge. He was not shaken because he had embarrassed me. He was shaken because the room he wanted so badly had respected me before he ever thought to. Miles caught up with me just outside the ballroom and said I had kept all of this from him. I looked at him for a long second because that was the easiest version for him to believe. I reminded him about the Bridge Forward anniversary dinner he had declined, the annual report I left on our kitchen table, and the nights I tried to explain that the foundation was helping us expand. Every time, he had been too busy, too tired, or too certain that what I was doing did not matter. I did not ask why he did not know. I asked why he had never wanted to know. He said that was not fair. So I asked him something simpler. If I had walked into that hotel tonight as nothing more than Brooke, the counselor with the salary you have criticized for years, would you have wanted me standing beside you? Miles stared at the carpet instead of answering. I took one step closer and asked the question that finally stripped away every excuse between us. If Lydia had not known my name tonight, would you be apologizing right now? Before Miles could answer, Kendra had stepped into the hallway behind us. She had heard enough to understand that the marriage Miles had described to her was not the marriage I had been living in. She looked directly at him and asked whether I knew he had been talking about a separate future, and I felt my stomach drop before he even opened his mouth. I asked what she meant. Kendra said Miles had told her we were practically finished and only still living together because separating everything would take time. That was the first time anyone had told me my marriage was already over while I was still inside it. Kendra looked shaken, not triumphant, and said she had believed she was dealing with a man whose wife already knew the truth. She walked away before Miles could stop her, leaving the two of us alone again. He said he had been confused, but I told him Kendra was not the real problem. The problem was that he had made me smaller every time he described me to someone else so he could feel better about the life he wanted. I did not threaten him, and I did not ask him to choose me. I told him I was going to my parents' house that night and that we would talk about ending the marriage the next day. Miles said my name as I turned away, but I kept walking. I drove myself home in the same older car he had spent years criticizing. For the first time, I did not look in the mirror to see whether he was following me. I filed for divorce soon after that night, and there was no dramatic legal battle waiting for us. We did not own an empire, and there was no secret fortune for either of us to fight over. Miles seemed convinced the Gala had damaged his career, and for a while he blamed me for the way people looked at him afterward. I told him I had not discussed our marriage with anyone at his company, and I had no intention of starting. Whatever happened next would have to come from the choices he had already made. Bridge Forward was still moving ahead with the workforce partnership involving Miles's company. I asked our board to remove me from any decision connected directly to his division because I did not want our work becoming part of our divorce. The partnership continued because it could help people find jobs, and those people had nothing to do with what happened between us. I would not use a program built to help families rebuild as a weapon against one man. That mattered to me more than getting even. The real problems at Miles's company had started long before anyone knew about our marriage. One manager had already transferred away from his team, and 2 employees had complained that Miles regularly took credit for work he had not done alone. Others said he treated community events like photo opportunities and cared more about who was watching than whether the work actually helped anyone. An employee survey also showed that trust inside his team had fallen badly. Grant Becker did not ask about our divorce during the leadership review because he did not need to. Miles was not fired. Instead, his nomination for the Metropolitan Leadership Council disappeared, and the promotion he had expected went to another director whose team had stronger retention and better internal reviews. Kendra ended all personal contact with him as well. She told him she could not build a relationship on a story that had required his wife to be portrayed as someone who no longer mattered. For the first time, Miles was losing things without being able to say I had taken them from him. None of that made my own life easy. There were nights at my parents' house when I cried over a marriage I still remembered as happy before everything changed. I missed the man who once carried folding chairs into my first workshop, even though I knew that version of him was gone. Leaving him was the right decision, but right decisions can still hurt. The difference was that I had finally stopped carrying the consequences of his choices for him. About a year after the gala, I finally left my community college position and began running Bridge Forward full-time. The program had grown enough to support a steady salary, and we opened 2 smaller centers in neighboring counties. None of that felt as important as the first night. I unlocked the door to my own townhouse and realized every choice inside it belonged to me. I picked the dining table, the curtains, and a reading chair by the window without wondering whether anyone else would think they looked impressive. For the first time in years, Ordinary decisions felt like freedom. One afternoon, a woman in her early 50s stayed behind after a workshop and told me she no longer knew who she was after 27 years of marriage. I understood the fear in her voice because I had once asked myself the same question. I told her starting over did not require knowing exactly who she would become. Sometimes it began with simply refusing to return to the place where she had learned to disappear. She cried, and I nearly did too. Around that time, an email from Miles appeared in my inbox asking if I would meet him. He did not ask me to come back, and he did not say he wanted another chance. He wrote that there were things he needed to take responsibility for without expecting anything from me in return. I left the message unanswered for a week before agreeing to meet him at a small diner on a Saturday morning. By then, I knew closure was different from reconciliation. Miles looked quieter when he walked in. He told me he had stepped away from management and moved into client training because he had finally accepted that wanting authority did not mean he knew how to lead people. Then he admitted that what happened with Kendra had crossed an emotional boundary long before I understood it, and he admitted he canceled my Gala badge because he had been ashamed of how he thought I would make him look. I asked him one final question. If I had never received that award, would you ever have believed you were wrong? Miles lowered his eyes and stayed silent for several seconds. Then he said that, back then, probably not. The answer hurt. But it also gave me something I had stopped expecting from him, the truth, without an excuse attached. I realized I no longer needed him to rewrite our past or prove that I had always been enough. I had finally stopped asking the person who diminished me to confirm my value. 2 years after the gala, Bridge Forward was still growing, but I no longer measured progress by how many people knew my name. One of my proudest moments came when a woman who had once arrived at our workshop in tears returned as a volunteer mentor for someone else, my mother, Denise, helped with interview confidence classes, while my father, Paul, fixed broken shelves, loose handles, and anything else the centers needed. They never treated my work like something glamorous. They simply treated it like something worth doing. Kendra eventually built her own consulting business and disappeared completely from Miles's personal life. We never became friends, and we did not need to. She had walked away when she realized the future Miles described to her had been built on a version of my marriage that was not true. I stopped seeing her as the woman who almost replaced me. She had been another person Miles tried to fit into the image he wanted. Miles stayed in client training, and over time I heard that he had become much more patient with the people around him. He started giving employees credit by name and stopped treating every success like proof of his own importance. He never got me back, and I think that mattered. Becoming better did not erase what he had done, and growth was never supposed to be a ticket back into my life. When Bridge Forward opened another center, Miles sent me a simple card congratulating me. He thanked me for loving him during years when he had not understood how to value that love. And I read it without feeling angry or hopeful. I placed it in a drawer and went back to work. That was when I knew the story had finally stopped controlling me. For a long time, I thought the biggest moment of that gala was hearing Lydia call me the guest of honor. It was not. The moment that changed my life was walking out afterward, getting into the same old car Miles had criticized, and driving away without checking whether he followed. I learned that you should never wait for a room full of people to recognize your value before you believe it yourself. If this story reminded you of a time you made yourself smaller to keep someone comfortable, share your thoughts below. And if you want more stories about rebuilding after betrayal, like, share, and subscribe.